Why have you not accepted the fact that you're truly an intermediate lifter? You've already built a solid foundation, yet are still attempting to train like a complete beginner. Sure, it was the most effective program you ever ran, but it won't yield the same results anymore since noob gains are tapped out. Prepare for actual plateaus because you have a proper base. Yes, exercises such as squats, bench presses, deadlifts, overhead presses, barbell rows, barbell curls, these simple time-proof movements that allow for progressive overload work for you, and you should continue incorporating them into your routine. However, it's important not to rely solely on the fundamentals or try to continuously milk any program that resembles rank novice progression, since you now have real muscular weaknesses. They are visible, you see and feel them. And after a year or two of training, you have a better understanding of your genetic predispositions, or you may realize that a program has deceived your expectations. It's crucial to address any imbalances now. And yes, the time is now. If you have gained appreciable muscle, say your first 10 to 15 pounds of lean tissue, then the goal should be to transform weak points into strong points, not double down on what you're good at. Because if you don't, in a couple years, when you eventually surpass intermediate, those weaknesses will 100% hold back your potential. To relate back to novices, it's fascinating how they often want to add things to their program, even though they already have a relatively high volume, high percentage, high frequency system that could exhaust even an advanced lifter. Despite being at a recovery level almost equivalent to someone using steroids, novices still have the inclination to add unnecessary variables, which almost always worsens programs, giving birth to the black pill. However, when they finally listen to the program creators and those who successfully run them, not modifying and accepting that less is required, that's when smooth workout progress happens. So with that in mind, if you're no longer a novice lifter, yet maintain that mentality, then the opposite effect will occur. So what you need to do is revert to the initial programming mindset that was incorrect at the start, but is now applicable. You see, optimal programming depends on timing and context. For example, an advanced lifter cannot even follow the most basic novice program without encountering problems. Like if I were to attempt my own novice program, after some months, I would undoubtedly get injured or regress. I can promise that. Similarly, a novice shouldn't try to train like an advanced lifter when they don't have weaknesses. Everything is weak. But intermediates find themselves in a unique zone where they can experiment with specialized training methods. They need new exercises or variations that specifically target their lagging areas. And the truth is, you know what you need to do. Let's say your lats are wide, but your upper back lacks thickness. In that case, you might want to focus more on the horizontal pulling movements rather than vertical, or favor a flared, wide arm path for pulls. If you're posterior chain dominant, you might want to do more heel elevated back squats, reverse SSB squats or front squats, hack squats, and sissy squats to maximize knee flexion. If you're torso dominant and your chest and back grows easily while your limbs lag behind, it might be worth considering an arm specialization program, even including an arm day. If your upper chest is flat but lower is decently thick, it could be smart to do inclines first or at a greater frequency. These are just a few scenarios among many possibilities, but the point is, we can't fail to listen to our bodies. Let's give ourselves more credit, shall we? For example, when I became intermediate, I was immediately aware that I wasn't built for deadlifting and that my back was going to be my best body part. I already had a decent V-taper, even with calisthenics. I also knew that my upper arms were very stubborn. These facts were established right from the beginning, in my first 8 months of lifting. And it took me years of foolishly following powerlifters to realize that I had been right all along. I wasted so much time when the solutions were so simple. It didn't have to escalate to this point. Don't mess up your proportions. Avoid artificial muscular imbalances. When I use the term artificial, I mean that while genetics play a role, not correcting those weaknesses only reinforces your genetic limitations. Like I've said repeatedly, I don't have favorable arm genetics, yet I managed to build them up to 17 inches at only 5'5". And by the end of my current bulk, I plan to reach 17.5 inches. I'm going to get there because I hold myself accountable to the highest level. You can do the same early on. The genetics excuse, even if somewhat valid, should not be a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's almost like you need to delude yourself into believing you have great genetics. Prevent the fire from starting in the first place. And in my case, all this frustration of being stuck at 16-inch arms could have been avoided had I gone straight into arm specialization within my second year of training. No one would have ever known that I was torso dominant. That's all I'm trying to say. Novices are always trying to add more things to their plate, while intermediates are always reducing, which is the complete opposite problem. So please, reject any form of minimalist thinking. The only people who get away with it are genetic freaks and novices. Also, daily linear progression, which was the most effective thing you've ever done until now, will no longer work. The only time you'll experience that again is if you enter the degenerate dark side or if you're rebounding in weight. Let's say you reach single-digit body fat or went through a massive deficit, cutting for 6 months or even longer, causing a significant loss in strength. Once you start eating in a surplus, you may notice that after a month or two, 90% of your strength returns. Each workout, you'll be adding 5 to 10 pounds on most exercise and increasing your rest by 1 or 2. Eventually, this progress will stall out. You'll only achieve plus ones, and in some workouts, there won't be any improvements at all. The numbers may remain the same, or depending on your recovery, you might experience a slight regression. When you're experienced, the journey becomes like a roller coaster. At best, intermediate lifters can expect to add 5 pounds every week, known as weekly linear progression. However, it won't be workout to workout, especially if you're following a high-frequency full-body system. If you are progressing at that rate, understand that it's not due to muscle gain, but rather neurological adaptations from movements you haven't done before. Now, another phenomenon I've noticed in many body transformations where novices become intermediates is that they'll usually start off skinny fat, and by the end, they're ripped up and have gained significant size. Influencers often showcase such transformations to prove that bulking is completely unnecessary, as if this degree of evolving never slows down and is equally effective for experienced lifters. They'll even showcase their first-year clients as proof. But let me tell you something. It's not difficult to accumulate testimonials from novices because they can get away with almost everything. The true sign of a great trainer is when they can break through plateaus of seasoned lifters. That's when training becomes more customized. Anyone can take a beginner to a decent level, but when faced with years of hard plateaus and muscular imbalances, that's when knowledge shines through. Basically, novices are exceptions to almost everything. They defy the rules of long-term programming and diet, which is why we even need to be careful with exercise science that uses novices to draw conclusions. So when you reach an intermediate level, it becomes much harder to maximize progress in a calorie deficit or maintenance, unless body fat is already moderate to high. And when you're advanced elite, it's nearly impossible. Speaking from my own experience, I can tell you it's 100% not possible for me. I've lost strength in every cut I've gone through, and that's normal. So when these trainers talk trash about bulking through using novices as examples, I challenge them to coach guys like me. They're full of it, and deep down, they know it. That's why their messages are catered to novices, because they're appealing to the masses and don't care about you reaching your potential. They're not here for serious lifters who want the best results. So I'm telling you the facts right now. If your nutrition is off at this stage, if you haven't mastered it, get ready to stay in intermediate purgatory. Many get stuck there forever and then falsely attribute this to a genetic limit. That's a sad, pathetic excuse from those who are not willing to make sacrifices to reach their goals. Like, you think I haven't been there? I always had a six-pack and began my fitness journey with calisthenics, which forces an incentive to stay lean. Even during my first year of training, I maintained a ripped physique. There was nobody at my age who looked that good. I was the most buff, most aesthetic teenager in my school, and even at the gym, very few on my level. But guess what? After newbie gain C's, I had to bulk because I was no longer getting noticeably bigger or stronger. My numbers would stay the same for months until I finally decided to gain weight. And it didn't take much. I was 167 pounds and would bulk up to the low 180s, where some years later, I became known as the bear mode guy. At first, this wasn't on purpose. I did it because it was the only thing that worked. And it's still what I do to this day. I would never have reached this level without bulking. And regarding recomping, yes, it does work, but only if you bulked into it first. So either way, you have to do at least one bulk if you're too lean. The saying, eat big to get big, is not overrated. It's an unavoidable truth. So assuming your intermediate programming is on point, if you're not progressing and body weight remains stale, then diet is what needs fixing. You can run the best program in the world, but if you're not eating enough, not much is going to happen. You'll plateau for months, which could have easily been overcome with 1 month of proper bulking. It's literally that simple. Bulk or stay intermediate for longer than expected. This is what you actually need to hear. Now, speaking about plateaus, you need to stop confusing slower progress for plateaus. It's normal for things to slow down because now your muscle gains are about 40% of the original speed, even though you were making explosive progress just a few weeks ago. Yeah, that's gone. I know it was so recent and you thought this progress was going to last longer, but no, it's a very short window of opportunity. It's like being in Dark Souls, dying and becoming permanently hollow. Accept that this is your position and understand that things will be slower. That's just the way it is. Otherwise, we would all be elite after 2 or 3 years of training. So if you're an average intermediate, it's going to take some time to reach your potential, at least 3 to 8 more years. You have to drop your ego and stay away from programs or advice that promises hyper progress. Even if those systems do work, chances are it's high risk, high reward. And a lot of what you accumulate won't necessarily be additional muscle. You'll just have a better pound for pound strength ratio. Like it might be some highly specific training where you become a better power lifter, but now you're moving away from your hypertrophy goals. I can't tell you how many guys I've seen do that, or those who want to run the small off squat program in full, or just running advanced programs when they're intermediate. Very important. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Because I'll say this, any intermediate lifter can run an advanced program. They're eligible. A novice can't, but an intermediate could run anything. And they will make gains, but the question is, how much faster compared to something that was appropriate for their current training experience? My response is maybe marginally better, but with far more risk, or less gains. So it's crucial to identify your lifting classification and not deviate from that, because your programming naturally changes with time. What got you to a 400-pound deadlift is not what's going to get you to a 500-pound deadlift and beyond. The same goes for the bench press. What got you to 225 is not what will get you to 315. Far from it. For example, I plan on releasing an advanced bench press program on how to get your bench from 315 to 405. I already know that many intermediates will be running it because they're looking at the end destination. And that's a mistake. If they were to wait a year or two and gain slightly more experience, then it would be an ideal program. Remember, everything is about timing. Intermediates often get caught up in this weird limbo trap of novice versus advanced. They try to mix in concepts from both, and that's how they end up going nowhere. Confusion leads to stalls and mimicking practices that best suit world-class lifters or the opposite, ranked beginners. I find that insane because the intermediate journey is not that difficult. Like, wait until you've been at this for longer. Nightmare mode is when you're scraping for gains, needing everything to be perfect. Your guys are stuck in normal mode due to their own stubbornness or applying too good to be true dogmatic concepts that have been thrown at them by sociopaths or miserable copers who don't have their best interests at heart. So be careful who you listen to. And I'll leave you off with that. Let me know if you want a part 2, where I cover more specific programming advice and share down below what you believe are some of the most common intermediate mistakes.